Hello, Definers. This episode is sponsored by Repurpose, makers of plant-based, compostable home goods, a female-founded business with a mission to eliminate plastic pollution. They are also on a mission to give you phenomenal discounts across their entire store. Sustainability Defined listeners get 30% off site-wide with the code SDPOD30. Again, that's SDPOD30. Learn more about Repurpose at repurpose.com.
All right, Definers, welcome back after a long break. Jay, how was the honeymoon?
We did a mini moon. We got our honeymoon coming up to South Africa, but Scott, I'm a newly married man in marital bliss, thanks in large part to you, my friend.
I thought you were going to say thanks in large part to Anna.
Well, goes without saying. I'll caveat.
All right, so thank you everyone for bearing with us during this break. I know Jay and Anna appreciated it that the Definers let them go on that break, but we're back now, and we're very excited to talk PFAS. I say excited, but it is kind of a sad topic, Jay, huh? That it's just one of those things.
A little, but Scott, here at Sustainability Defined, we confront the tough stuff,
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the sea level rise episode where I'm kind of like, damage is done. It's already, but there are steps we can take, and we'll get into that. So, Jay, let's do the outline.
All right, so let's start and say, what is PFAS? What do we know and what don't we know? Then we'll ask, why is PFAS harmful? Where can PFAS be found? What are the alternatives or substitutes for PFAS, and how can we eliminate PFAS? How is PFAS currently regulated, and what are some of the current policy proposals? How can people avoid or at least reduce further PFAS exposure? And then we will segue into our conversation with our expert guest, Lauren Gropper, the founder and CEO of Repurpose. Mm-hmm. So, Scott, what is PFAS? And tell us, what do we know and what don't we know?
So to start, PFAS, also known as per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, is defined by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development as a large group of chemicals widely used in industrial and consumer applications since the 1950s, most usually where extremely low surface energy or surface tension and or durable water and oil repellency is needed. Did you get lost in that? Probably. So here's a simpler version. They're chemicals that are used in various products due to their valuable properties, such as their ability to repel water and oil, to resist heat, and to persist.
There are both short and long chain PFAS, which can be distinguished based on the length of the fluorinated carbon chain. We say fluorinated carbon chain because PFAS contain bonds between fluorine and carbon atoms. The length of the fluorinated carbon chain can result in different properties that influence the substance's behavior in the environment and in organisms, and its bioaccumulation and ecotoxicity. In other words, different kinds of PFAS have different effects.
This is one of our more chemistry-heavy episodes.
Quite.
So we'll get into the potential effects of PFAS later in this episode. We're also going to get into their applications. But some quick examples of where PFAS are used are non-stick cookware, food packaging such as pizza boxes and candy wrappers, cosmetic products, dental floss, and waterproof clothing.
PFAS are in these products and others because they enable a lot of properties that humans enjoy and depend on. For example, their heat resistance is useful for firefighting foam, and their insulation is useful for certain aerospace applications. While there is a lot of research going on to find PFAS alternatives, some of these important products don't currently have readily available PFAS substitutes, or the substitutes just don't perform that well.
Jay, I think those are two really important points, that these things aren't just in the products for fun. They have a lot of value in certain applications, right? And that we can't just move away from them tomorrow, at least some of them, right?
Yeah, I think we'll talk about this example later with Lauren, but for me, one of the simplest examples is just kind of your your quintessential disposable paper plate that's got that film on it that stops your pizza grease from reaching your fingers on the other side, right? So like you know them, you know what they do, but as we're learning, there aren't a whole lot of great ways to replace them just yet.
Right, and it sounds like she's found a good substitute, but certain other applications, there's just not a good performing substitute right now.
Exactly.
All right, so Jay, let's get into the history here. So why were these man-made chemicals made in the first place? Well, the origin story of PFAS starts with research on the refrigerator. A researcher at Kinetic Chemicals, a subsidiary of DuPont, was on the hunt for a less toxic chemical to use as a refrigerant. From his research in the late 1930s, he made a new substance under the name of polytetrafluoroethylene, PTFE, and that was trademarked by DuPont as Teflon, which I think a lot of people know, in 1945. If you want to hear another episode where we struggle through long chemical names, you'll have fun listening to episode 3 on neonicotinoids. That's an oldie, huh? Episode 3, Jay. We're on 68.
Goodness. Scott, we were so bright-eyed back then.
Yes. So, by 1951, Teflon was distributed commercially, specifically in the bread and cookie-making market. Soon after, a French engineer by the name of Marc Gregore. What do you think, Jay? Gregore?
Americanized as Gregory, but Scott, I respect your commitment to Gregore.
Aren't you the French one between the two of us?
Oh, far from it.
Oh, okay. So what did I say? Gregore. Let's go with that. He found a way to bond PTFE with aluminum. Gregore originally used this Teflon coating solely for his fishing gear to prevent tangles, but it was soon suggested by his wife, why don't you use that coating on some cooking pans? And that idea was patented, and kitchenware with this technology was on store shelves by 1955.
A smart wife right there.
Mm-hmm.
So today, there are thousands of different types of PFAS globally. This is part of why there is an ever-evolving debate over how to regulate thousands of chemicals efficiently, many of which are actively in commerce today. For example, do we treat all PFAS the same, or do we group them in some way and regulate them differently? We'll talk about PFAS policy more later on. And listeners, throughout this episode, we may use the words PFOA and PFAS.
In fact, we will use them.
Right, there's no conditional here. It is going to happen.
Uh-huh.
PFOA and PFAS, sometimes known as, quote, C8, due to their chain of 8 carbons, are two, quote, legacy PFAS that PFAS researchers have focused the most on, since they have been the most extensively produced. Their uses have largely been phased out globally, while shorter chain PFAS have entered the market.
All right, Jay, let's talk about the potential impacts of PFAS on humans and animals that's raising some major red flags. While scientists still don't fully understand the extent of the effect of PFAS exposure on humans, there's current peer-reviewed scientific studies that have shown exposure to certain levels of PFAS may lead to, and this is a long, not-so-great list, Jay, reproductive effects such as decreased fertility or increased high blood pressure in pregnant women, developmental effects or delays in children, including low birth weight, accelerated puberty, bone variations, or behavioral changes, increased risk of some cancers, including prostate, kidney, and testicular cancers, reduced ability of the body's immune system to fight infections, including reduced vaccine response, interference with the body's natural hormones, increased cholesterol levels, and or risk of obesity.
Scott, that sounds like, you'll be watching TV and you'll get that random drug ad that comes on that has their list of side effects that goes on for longer than you would ever anticipate.
Yeah, and this isn't just diarrhea.
So, definers, PFAS needs to enter our bodies to cause all of these wonderful issues that Scott just listed. So, the question is, how does PFAS get in there? Well, PFAS can enter your body if you breathe air, eat food, or drink water containing them. It's possible for PFAS to enter the body through skin contact as well. Once inside, PFAS tends to remain there for years. It takes nearly 4 years for the level in the body to go down by half, and PFAS mainly leaves the body through urine. PFAS also doesn't only affect humans. Animals can be exposed to and ingest PFAS by swallowing or drinking contaminated groundwater, surface water, feed, or soil. And Scott, I know you and I just turn over in our sleep knowing that Sweet Delta or Sweet Judy could have PFAS in them too.
Totally. And, I know I was made a joke about the diarrhea effect of PFAS, but this is serious stuff, and it's serious because of the combination of toxicity and longevity that makes them so dangerous. And yet, Jay, there's still a lot to learn here about what is their exact impact on humans and the environment, how much exposure is necessary to cause these really serious effects we're talking about. Well, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, has actually listed out a number of questions and issues regarding PFAS that scientists are still trying to figure out. These include some pretty basic stuff like how to better and more efficiently detect and measure PFAS in our air, water, soil, and fish and wildlife, how much people are exposed to PFAS, how harmful PFAS are to people and the environment, how to remove PFAS from drinking water, and how to manage and dispose of PFAS. Maybe that's almost in part the scary part here, Jay, is we still have so much unanswered about this.
Great point, Scott. But what we will try to answer here right now is why is PFAS harmful?
Nice transition.
Right? Thank you. So, in short, PFAS leads to the negative effects we mentioned because of its stability and persistence. The stability comes from PFAS being made by joining carbon and fluorine, one of the strongest bonds in organic chemistry. In fact, actually, this bond is virtually indestructible. Hence, why PFAS has earned the nickname, quote, forever chemicals.
And as with other kinds of chemicals, once PFAS get into the groundwater or released into the air, it can travel. Plus, they can bioaccumulate, meaning they can build up in your body over time. We mentioned potential negative health impacts from PFAS exposure, but how and why do certain PFAS have these impacts on our bodies? Well, when PFAS chemicals enter our body, they bind to certain protein molecules, and some actually have the potential to disrupt hormone signals, which is why certain PFAS are also known as endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs. Any chemical that is an EDC can be particularly dangerous for children when these signals are turned off and on. Some PFAS can also emulate fatty acids. Fatty acids serve as the energy and building blocks for the muscles, heart, and other organs, so it's easy to see how a PFAS, being an imposter in our biology, can be extremely disruptive. Also, when those specific PFAS mimicking fatty acids try to bind to cell receptors designed for legit fatty acids, it's an imperfect fit that can lead to cell damage and metabolism disruption.
In summary, definers, as PFAS enters our body with the ability to both interrupt our hormone signals and mimic our fatty acids, it sets up the perfect playing field for the health issues to emerge that we've referenced earlier in this episode, like developmental and reproductive effects. Okay, so Scott, we've covered why these PFAS impacts are so unfortunate. Let's then ask, where can PFAS be found? Unfortunately, PFAS can be found just about everywhere, from drinking water to your favorite sandwich from a shop down the street to your go-to hiking shoes. It's all too common.
Yeah, the scary parts are adding up, and EPA actually compiled a list of places where PFAS can be found, and it's a long list. Drinking water, including public and private water systems, soils and water near waste sites like landfills and hazardous waste areas, fire extinguishing foam, which, you would think it's useful, right, Jay? We want fire extinguishing foam, but yeah, foods like fish from contaminated waters, dairy from exposed livestock, and even food packaging like fast food containers, pizza boxes, and candy wrappers. PFAS are also found in household products, ranging from that non-stick cooking pan like we've been talking about, to paints, clothing, and personal care products like shampoos.
A disheartening fact here is that a federal study found PFOA and PFAS, if you recall earlier from the episode, was in the blood of 98% of Americans, and this was a 2007 study, so quite a long time ago.
Right, and Jay, what I'm about to get into makes me think it might be even just 100%, because John Oliver, he did a nice segment on this in October 2021. If we had the rights, Jay, I would have been like, just play that episode and we can sit this one out. But that segment mentioned how the company 3M, they wanted a control group to compare against its employees who handle PFAS during its manufacture. So it looked globally to find this clean blood, and it couldn't find it. So to get its control group, it actually had to use the blood that had been taken and archived from Army recruits at the start of the Korean War. Just crazy.
My grandfather was a part of the Korean War. That's that long ago. And sorry, folks, one more finding that sticks out to us on the ubiquity of PFAS. European researchers published a study in summer 2022, so effectively hot off the press, literally, that found rainwater everywhere could be judged unsafe to drink based on the latest U.S. guidelines for PFOA in drinking water. The study found that even in the most remote areas of the world, such as Antarctica and the Tibetan Plateau, rainwater was still contaminated with unsafe levels of PFAS. This is concerning, obviously, since many people around the world drink rainwater directly, and it feeds into water systems.
It's crazy I was able to travel to those places, huh, Jay?
It is, and I mean, I think, Scott, the word ubiquity just nails it. I mean, it's crazy to think that it reaches these remote areas and that it is that pervasive.
Right, so hopefully we've sufficiently spooked you here on this. So what are the alternatives and substitutes, and how can we eliminate this thing maybe? So, Jay, let's get into it.
Yeah, so with the overwhelming amount of research finding negative impacts on PFAS on our environment and health, as well as policy proposals curbing or outlawing the use of PFAS, the result is private industry putting significant effort into finding alternatives and putting some into the marketplace.
Right, so one organization that has looked into PFAS alternatives is the Washington State Department of Ecology, because a 2018 law made it the first in the nation to ban PFAS in food packaging. The law directed DOE to implement a program to reduce priority chemicals in consumer products. Over 2 reports, DOE has found safer alternatives in a variety of applications, and that's good. Food boats, pizza boxes, plates and wraps, liners, bags and sleeves, bowls, flat serviceware, open-top containers, and closed containers. You can see in those public reports all the alternatives they found, but one example is for bags and sleeves. The safer alternative it recommends is densified paper and wax-coated options. So a little bit more on Washington State. It's continued to lead on PFAS legislation. In April 2022, a new law was passed that bans the use of PFAS in a range of these products, including apparel, nonstick pans, cosmetics, cleaning products, and firefighter gear after 2025. And really, Jay, that's the fastest timeline in the United States.
Mm-hmm. And with cookware specifically, we did find an article from Food and Wine that details some alternatives. The main ones were ceramic, stainless steel, and cast iron.
Oh, cast iron, Jay. We do love a good cast iron skillet dish. You must have one, right?
Oh, Scott, I can't even begin to tell you about the cast iron skillet cookies that Anna makes because my taste buds just light on fire so much it's hard to even get words out.
Is it like one big cookie?
It's, okay, the skillet itself isn't like full pan size, but it's like, a good like burger-sized iron cast skillet, and man, I don't even know how to put it into words. I don't know how to put it into words. It is just incredible. How about you?
Well, let me just say, Shannon and I, like, if you cook with the cast iron skillet, we're eating something tasty, but it's annoying to clean up, so the person who didn't do the cooking has to clean it. So you must have to clean the cookie cast iron skillet,
do,
right?
But Scott, you're not going to find me complaining about like scraping the, last bits of like chocolate chip and cookie dough out of the skillet.
Understood. Okay, well, I tend to make salmon in cast iron skillet, and I don't really want to eat the scraps from that, so. All right. So, Jake, let's keep going. Let's talk rain jackets.
All right, so Scott, from cookies to rain jackets. A lot of rain jackets that are water resistant use PFAS. We found a Sierra Club article showing some alternative jackets. For example, Norway-based Helly Hansen has a rain jacket that repels the rain with fabric that is woven in a certain design that beads water at its surface rather than letting it soak through.
Nice.
Also, the Swiss brand Mammoth says it's innovating to be completely PFAS-free across its entire brand by summer 2025. So, Scott, we've got some lessons to learn from our European counterparts here.
Sure, and it's not only in jackets, Jay. It's all kinds of apparel. I mean, I was looking the other day for a new pair of Merrell hiking shoes. I'm a Merrell guy, and I saw a bunch of waterproof options with Gore-Tex. I was like, I'm doing this whole episode on PFAS. Waterproof things tend to have PFAS. So I Googled to see if Gore-Tex has PFAS, and I found this statement on its website. The high-performing durable water repellent, or DWR, treatments that Gore currently uses in its moisture barrier products are based on a type of PFAS known as short-chain, side-chain fluorinated polymers, which may contain trace residuals of non-polymer PFAS. So Gore-Tex, they're working on alternatives. They're going to be offering products with PFAS-free membranes in late 2022. But after reading all this, I was like, okay, never mind. I'm just going to go with a non-waterproof hiking shoe because I was concerned about the PFAS issue. But, of course, Jay, the flip side, now my shoe is not waterproof, which would have been nice.
Yeah, but, Scott, that'll turn you into a more tactful hiker.
Yeah, I got to really look at that weather report. Okay, so let's talk fast food packaging, Jay. There are alternatives being pushed on that front, like uncoated paper, bamboo, or plastic derived from cornstarch or sugarcane, and alternative coatings, including biowax or clay. The switch is needed, considering Consumer Reports tested in fall 2021 more than 100 different kinds of food packaging products from many restaurant chains, and found the presence of PFAS in packaging from all the chains, from Arby's and Taco Bell to Cava and Sweetgreen. Now,
and Scott, let me tell you, I go weak in the knees for Cava. I'll just say it.
So you have Cava in Denver?
They finally made it out here, along with Sweetgreen, two, I think, DC chains that are more than welcome here in Denver.
Yeah, and you would think those chains would really be on top of this, and I'm sure they're actively trying to get out of it. But many restaurants are now saying they will remove PFAS from their packaging, including McDonald's, Starbucks, Whole Foods, and Restaurant Brands International, which owns Burger King, Popeyes, and Tim Hortons. So that the trick here, Jay, like we were saying earlier, finding an alternative that performs just as well. That's why these companies aren't like, yeah, we'll fix it tomorrow.
Exactly. And so, Definers, if you're making a big purchase, test for PFAS before installing it to ensure you're not going to be exposed. The city of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, learned this the hard way. It paid $3.5 million for an artificial turf that the manufacturer touted as free of PFAS. A local advocacy group tested the field after it was installed, and unfortunately, there was PFAS. The manufacturer says that the contract only specified that the chemicals be undetectable by a particular EPA-approved testing method, which some on the city council seem to agree was sufficient. Portsmouth is familiar with PFAS and spent the extra money for what it thought was PFAS-free turf because PFAS contaminated part of the city's water supply due to the use of aqueous firefighting foam at a former Air Force base there. So it all hit close to home.
There's a lot to that story, Jay, in terms of the firefighting foam with the drinking water and you're paying all that money for the alternative. But to me, the thing that sticks out to me is the different tests where apparently the manufacturer's like, we tested this one way and everything's fine, so lay off. And then there was other tests conducted that said, no, there's PFAS and unsafe levels. And, having not just one standard test seems to be an issue as well.
Absolutely.
All right, so Jay, let's talk about some current regulations and current policy proposals. But first, let's just zoom out a little bit. And to us, the accelerated development of products with PFAS, it's an example of an invention that certainly has benefited the human experience in certain ways, right? But it's also had very serious long-term environmental or health-related side effects. And it doesn't seem like we were talking about the history of how PFAS was invented, that guy was out to develop something that was going to have these potential negative impacts on our environment or health. But as our scientific understanding and technology evolves, we have to think about how do we change our manufacturing processes and products and in some cases force the change so that these negative health effects aren't occurring.
Right. And Scott, to your point, there is pretty clear evidence that manufacturers became aware of the risks from PFAS and kind of sort of hid it from the public. As far back as 1950, studies conducted by 3M showed that the family of toxic fluorinated chemicals now known as PFAS could build up in our blood. By the 1960s, animal studies conducted by 3M and DuPont revealed that PFAS chemicals could pose health risks. There are internal memos, studies, and other company documents showing how these companies deceived the public.
Yeah, not okay. And some of you might know of PFAS because this was movie material. There was a movie made called Dark Waters, Mark Ruffalo, and it tells the story of a lawyer who specialized in defending large chemical companies, but then when approached for help by a West Virginia farmer, he actually went against the large chemical companies and pursued a class action lawsuit against DuPont. Spoiler alert here, in 2017, that attorney won a $617 million settlement on behalf of more than 3,500 plaintiffs.
It's truly a Hulk-sized settlement there, Scott.
Nice.
Thank you. All right. So we've laid down the facts and we've learned about the long-term impacts of PFAS on our health and environment. So how is this group of chemicals being regulated? Well, let's first start with examples of PFAS regulation in the United States at the federal level. Regulation on PFAS in the U.S. started with the EPA exercising its authority under the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA, publishing two, quote, significant new use rules, or SNURs, in 2002. It required manufacturers to report to the EPA the manufacture or import of 75 PFAS chemicals being voluntarily phased out by 3M, which was and is a major PFAS manufacturer. In 2006, the EPA created the PFOA Stewardship Program and invited 8 major PFAS producers to pledge to reduce 95% of their facilities' PFOA emissions by 2010.
I feel like our listeners that are studying environmental law and policy are like, oh, they mentioned TSCA, they mentioned SNURs. They're just loving it, Jay.
Scott, I tell you, I never knew the acronym SNUR before this, but I look forward to incorporating it when and wherever I can.
And I think some of our other listeners, Jay, are like, can we move on? But we can't. This is important. This is interesting stuff, let me tell you. So the EPA's regulation of PFAS through the Safe Drinking Water Act, let's talk about that, began in 2009 when the EPA released provisional health advisories for PFAS and PFOA. In 2016, the EPA reported a lifetime drinking water health advisory level of 70 parts per trillion for PFAS and PFOA. And that sounds very small, but then these were updated in June 2022. And the updated advisory levels, which are based on new science and consider lifetime exposure, indicate that some negative health effects may occur with concentrations of PFOA or PFAS in water that are near zero and below EPA's ability to detect at this time. I want to emphasize that, Jay. EPA is saying negative health effects occur from PFOA and PFAS below what they can even detect. So importantly, though, these health advisory levels, they're not enforceable standards. They're values collected to help officials in their efforts to protect the public's health.
Still, though, Scott, these health advisories are being challenged in court as unconstitutional by Chemours, which is a DuPont spinoff that some say was created to take the PFAS liabilities away from DuPont.
And some may say Chemours. I don't know.
Oh, boy. Yeah, I totally just shot that one off, Scott. So. Some lawmakers are also critical of them. For example, Senator Capito of West Virginia issued a statement saying the updated lifetime advisory levels are impossible to detect and will create confusion for water system compliance efforts and users.
Okay, so going from the EPA now, we're going to go over to the Food and Drug Administration. And it's amazing how many parts of federal regulatory bodies are touching on this.
Oh, yeah.
And they regulate the use of certain PFAS chemicals in food packaging. And it came out in 2020 with a 3-year voluntary phase-out program. And now the agency is reviewing a petition from environmental groups calling for a PFAS ban in some food packaging.
And so then, Scott, we ask what's next at the federal level here in the U.S.? Well, 8 federal agencies will continue to execute the steps they outlined in mid-2021, which includes the EPA's PFAS strategic roadmap that goes from 2021 to 2024.
And we also want to highlight 2 planned EPA actions. So EPA is moving forward with proposing a PFAS national drinking water regulation in fall 2022. And as EPA develops this proposed rule, the agency is apparently evaluating additional PFAS beyond PFOA and PFAS for further action. The other notable EPA activity here is its plan to designate PFOA and PFAS as hazardous substances under the Superfund law that focuses on the cleanup of contaminated sites. That can have a lot of repercussions. But Jay, let's move along. What about the state level in the U.S.?
Right. So let's drill down. We've already discussed some of Washington State's actions. Another leading state is Maine, which in July 2021 passed a comprehensive law that first bans new carpet, rugs, and fabric treatments that contain intentionally added PFAS as of January 1, 2023. Then, starting in January 1 of 2030, the sale or distribution of any new product containing intentionally added PFAS will be prohibited. In total, 10 states, including California, Colorado, Connecticut, Maine, Maryland, Minnesota, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington, have adopted legislation banning the use of PFAS in all or some food packaging. We did find a nice piece from JD Supra that breaks down how various states regulate PFAS in drinking water as of March 2022. Unfortunate note here, 30 states have no regulation of PFAS in drinking water, so that's something to keep an eye on, folks.
Is it your state? I don't know. You're going to have to look at the article that we sourced to that you can find on sustainabilitydefined.com.
Nudge, nudge.
Now, Jay, I feel like sometimes we focus a bit too much on the U.S., and we want to make sure that we're talking globally. It's a global show, and we did look, and most of the action we found on PFAS is in the EU, although we also found some mention of regulations in Canada and Australia. In the EU, the governments of Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Norway announced in mid-2021 that by July 2022, so they must be on it, will formally propose to the European Chemicals Agency that these chemicals be restricted under the REACH, which stands for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization, and Restriction of Chemicals legislation. Now, final agreement by EU member states to prohibit the production, marketing, and use of these substances throughout Europe could actually happen as early as 2025. So, Jay, how can people avoid or at least reduce further PFAS exposure?
Scott, well, unfortunately, while PFAS in blood levels can be measured, this is not a routine test that can be done in your doctor's office. And then, even if the test is done, it's not yet clear what the results might mean in terms of possible health effects, since exposure does not necessarily mean negative impacts on human health or the environment. So I hate to answer your question with a pretty ambiguous answer, but there you go.
Okay, and Jay, speaking of routine blood tests, did you see that HBO documentary on Theranos, right?
Yes, I did.
Kind of blew my mind.
We also watched the, I think Hulu did a series on it.
Right.
That was also really, really good.
What's kind of like the WeWork thing, like where they had a documentary but also a series. I'm always more interested in the documentary, I guess because I like to read nonfiction books and not fiction books. Like, I would just show me the real people, tell me what actually happened. And yeah, just that footage and how she, probably believed this stuff, but just kept it going and was kind of flirting with the truth. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
I wish it did exist, though. Anyway, one thing you can do is check to see if your tap water has PFAS. So here's some resources. The PFAS Exchange has a map showing sites across the U.S. with known or suspected PFAS contamination, and where communities are advocating strong health and environmental protections. Environmental Working Group also has an interactive PFAS contamination map. That's at ewg.org/PFAS map. You could ask your local water utility or health department if your water has been tested for PFAS. You can also pay to have a lab test your water for PFAS. We found a testing kit from Cyclopure for $79, and we hyperlink to that. Now, if your water has concerning levels of PFAS, you could consider installing in-home water treatment like filters or reverse osmosis that are certified to lower the levels of PFAS in your water. You can also use bottled or canned water for activities such as cooking with foods that soak up a lot of water like soup and rice, or for drinking, be it humans or pets. And Jay, you probably noticed, bottled or canned. I had to put in cans.
Right. I was about to say, I know which route you would suggest, Scott. Which
cans all the way, baby.
I am likely to follow. So, folks, you can also be careful about the seafood you buy. If you eat locally sourced fish or shellfish, check your local fish advisories before you chow down. Another suggestion is to dust your home regularly, since PFAS can collect in household dust, which is bad news to all of you guys, myself included, like to put off household chores.
Yeah, I was going to say, how often do people really dust? I should dust more.
I don't know.
I wish I did.
I'll tell you, Scott, I did it actually last week, and I was thinking, I don't know the last time I have ever done this. But
it's definitely a rewarding thing, because you're like, oh my God,
yeah.
Look at this impact I just made, removing all this dust.
That's right. So definers: vacuum carpets, use a wet mop on solid floors, and wipe other solid surfaces with a wet cloth. There then are some smart substitutions you could consider. If you have non-stick pots and pans that are chipped or cracked, consider replacing them with stainless steel and iron cookware a la Scott's salmon, as we discussed earlier. Note, though, that the main concerns come from overheating or scraping nonstick pans rather than just regular use. You can also eat less fast food and takeout. As discussed earlier, many of the containers that the food comes in have PFAS coating.
That probably has other positive ramifications on
Yes, you're right.
on your wallet, on other things. So,
and lastly, for the home movie fanatics, you can ditch your bagged popcorn. You can instead buy corn kernels and heat them in a glass microwavable popcorn popper instead to avoid some of that PFAS.
Shannon is all about making popcorn in that way. You guys have a popcorn popper like that?
No, honestly, Scott, we're saying this. We go old school. We use bagged popcorn, but tell me, does she like her?
Oh yeah,
popcorn method.
Yeah, and then drenches it in butter. So.
That away, Shannon.
All right. So when outfitting or remodeling your home, don't buy stain-resistant carpets and upholstery. Although that's probably easier said than done. I get why people want a stain-resistant carpet. So, but no, there might be a trade-off there.
We've got pets.
And in general, when searching for substitutes for PFAS, such as in weatherproof outdoor gear, EcoCult advises that, quote, if a brand says its products are PFAS-free, PFC-free, or free of fluorinated chemicals, then they're clean. If it says they are PFOA, PFAS, long-chain, or CH-free, or says it uses short-chain DWR, then it still uses a certain type of PFAS that has similar health concerns, albeit somewhat less studied, end quote. And Jay, I feel like after all this, I'm like, oh yeah, those are only certain kinds of PFAS, so that wouldn't cover the whole thing. Makes sense. So one example here is that Arc'teryx sells a short-chain DWR spray-on water repellent. That means it still uses fluorinated chemicals, just not the very worst kind, right? Because it's using the short chain.
Mm-hmm.
And note, though, if you are going to use something like this and you spray it inside, that's pretty dangerous. You could be inhaling those chemicals. So we just wanted to note that sort of thing.
All right, Definers, we have talked quite a bit about PFAS here, where it is, what its problems are, what's happening to try to reduce them. Here's, Scott, obviously one of our favorite parts of all of our episodes is our expert guest conversation where we get to dive deeper into this stuff in ways that I think our Definers can directly relate to.
And someone who's making a difference about it.
Exactly. So today, we have the pleasure, the opportunity to speak with Lauren Gropper, the founder and CEO of Repurpose, Inc. So Repurpose has been making green alternatives to disposables since 2010. In other words, it's all about more plants, less plastics.
Good tagline.
Quite. Its products are available at more than 17,000 stores across the nation, and it has been ranked more than once as one of Inc. 500's fastest growing private companies.
So we're going to talk with Lauren about how her company provides sustainable alternatives that fit into people's busy lives so they can reduce their exposure to chemicals like PFAS. In fact, Repurpose was the first tableware brand to address, eliminate, and replace PFAS in its products. We enjoyed talking with Lauren about how they went about removing PFAS from their products and the journey she has been on as an entrepreneur with this eco-minded company. Let's get to it, Jay.
Here we go.
All right, Definers, welcome to our interview with Lauren Gropper, founder and CEO of Repurpose, Inc. We're excited to talk with her all the way from LA. So I imagine, Lauren, you have a lot of movie star friends maybe, or?
Oh yeah, living the dream out here.
Where you're driving everywhere, sure.
Yes.
So thank you for talking with us about your company and how you all have addressed PFAS, but we wanted to start with just some background questions to get to know you a little bit. So you have this incredible background, right, as the founder and CEO of Repurpose, Inc., and you also co-founded Minimal Productions, this environmental consulting firm. But can you tell us a little bit about what initially ignited your interest in the field of sustainability?
Yeah, and thanks for that awesome intro. I grew up in Vancouver, Canada, which is a very tree hugger-ish kind of place in the best way.
Yeah, we need more of those, Lauren.
It really, I guess from an early age, I was exposed to a lot of time in nature, and it just made me very interested in the environment and sustainability. And so I actually ended up going to college and focusing on geography and environmental studies. and learned a lot more. And that made the passion even deeper, to the point that I was just so focused on, I wanted to have a career in sustainability somehow, some way. So there were many roads that led to Repurpose and sustainability. My first actual career was actually in sustainable design and architecture. So that was my initial passion, was green building and kind of helping to change the way that cities and buildings were built. And I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, our understanding is that while you were still working at Gensler, like a really big design firm, that's when you started the company, and you were kind of doing them both at the same time. Is that right, at one point?
Yes, I was consulting for Gensler, so I was never working for Repurpose on Gensler time. But
okay,
just for the record,
let it be known.
Yeah, I think that it was what had to be done, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs are probably in the same boat, where it's all bootstrapped in the beginning, and you still have to make a living while you're working on your sort of dream company. And that was kind of how I was able to do it in the beginning. I just wasn't able to kind of quit everything and make no money for years. I mean, we really made no money for years. Thankfully, I was able to, do the consulting work, which really helped fund the early days of Repurpose.
Sure. And when you started it, did you imagine it would get to where it is today? Like, was that kind of the goal and the way the first business plan was written?
You know what? We'd hoped, absolutely hoped, that it would get to where it is today. I think the experience that I had working in the green building space was one that I was able to see kind of a conventional practice that really was changing to a more sustainable one with the advent of green building. And it felt like, there was just so much momentum on the green building side, that on the issue of plastics and alternatives to plastics, it just was going to be huge. And that there would come a time where the conventional way of making these disposable products using petroleum and, using a fossil fuel to make a disposable product, just to me made no sense whatsoever. So I just felt like it was one that was outdated, and it really felt like a design problem, because using the wrong materials to create these disposable products. What if we could use a better material? What if we could use plants? What if we could use something that actually was clean and green and renewable and that would be degradable? That to me felt like the answer to the problem. And so I don't know, it just felt like it was going to be huge. I just had this gut feeling like this is going to be something, and it was early days when we started. Like, arguably we were ahead of the market, but we just sort of felt like we want to claim this. We want to be in this space, and we want to create a brand that stands for all these awesome attributes that are going to take over and disrupt this plastic.
Repurpose the space, maybe.
Oh.
Yeah.
And so, Lauren, let's pivot and dive a little bit deeper into Repurpose. We gave a intro to the company and kind of what you guys focus on in the intro, but here we are with the opportunity to speak with you, the founder. So our first question to you is, do you see your focus on plant-based materials as a true differentiator in the marketplace? And I guess as a part of that, how you feel your products compare to your competitors?
I think there are definitely a lot of companies producing plant-based alternatives to plastic now. Certainly at the beginning, we were one of the first, if not the first, to do it, and had very little competition. But as, consumer awareness has grown, and as legislation has come in to sort of require alternatives to plastic actually exist, we've seen a lot more new entrants. And what's interesting is each company kind of has their own unique trade secret, their own unique way of making these products. And what's great about ours, and I think what sets us apart, to answer your question, is because we've been doing it so long, I think we understand how to make a really incredible product at a really great price. And so when someone wants to make a switch from conventional plastic product to one that's more sustainable or eco-friendly, they don't have to pay more, and they're not sacrificing any of the quality that they're used to, or the durability or the performance. So from our perspective, sustainability means nothing unless it works as well as what you're used to using, or it's not going to cost you so much more. People aren't going to switch unless those factors are dealt with in the beginning.
I think that's a great way to frame it, Lauren. And continuing on that thread, you mentioned all these new entrants coming into this space, perhaps as this particular niche has matured a bit.
Yeah.
But, how do you feel when you see competitors come into this space that are perhaps touting green alternatives that you don't really see as legitimate?
Yeah, there is that.
Yeah.
We like to call that greenwashing,
Yep.
which I'm sure you've covered on the pod.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm not going to name names, but there are certainly some greenwashers out there that are claiming compostability, but that maybe are still using PFAS, for example, or they're not certified compostable. I think it's important to have, and at least in our space, third-party certifications that say, yes, you are what you claim you are. Like in the organic world, you have to be able to claim organic, you have to go through a certification. It's similar in our space now. So there are many companies out there without certifications claiming they are eco-friendly in one way or another, but they're not truly all the way there.
Sure. Well, and hopefully, our goal with this episode is to help educate those folks into making those decisions and walk them through what makes Repurpose stronger, right?
Yes. We're the tried and true.
There we go.
We like to call ourselves the gold standard because we check every box in terms of, PFAS free, durable, renewable, compostable, certified compostable, plant-based, all the things. And we've worked hard to really create the best products. So that's what we're trying to make people aware of, that, you really have to not do your homework, but you want to trust the brands that are doing it right.
Absolutely.
And with all those attributes, how do you decide what to lead with in your communications? Because there's many different types of audiences out there, and oftentimes you only have them for seconds, if a second. So what have you found is the best way to break through where people are like, oh, I'll look at this closer, give it a try?
Yeah, this is the $1 million question. I think it's different for different people, but I think what we've found, and it's changed a little bit, but we found the message that seems to resonate the most and sort of be the most clear for people is that here's a product that's made from plants that you'll use and then can then return to the soil to make plants again. The sort of the plant-based piece resonates well. People are very familiar with plant-based diets and plant-based alternatives to meats. So I think the plant-based is a message that is clean and clear and easy for people to understand. I think compostable is a little tougher. Not everybody understands what that is or what that means, or they think they need a home composter to use the products. So it's part of it, but the plant thing is a little easier to understand. And also people want to know for sure that it's free of toxins. So that's something that we tout as well.
That makes sense. And maybe it's in part with the plant-based meat trend. People are like, oh yeah, plant-based in that area, plant-based in packaging. Sure, I'll also get.
Yes, exactly. I think there's definitely some crossover there. Or at least there's, people are so used to seeing that now that it's a familiarity for them. So it's, they're more comfortable with it.
Okay, so I want to get to PFAS, but one more question for you in talking about all those great attributes of your products. One was compostable. And one of the things I bumped up against is going to, a socially minded restaurant where they're giving me compostable packaging, but they don't have in their restaurant the way to compost it. And I'm like, okay, why did that restaurant pay the extra? Although maybe for your product you don't pay extra, but maybe they're paying a price premium for this, and maybe someone gets it and they think, oh, it says compostable, so I guess it's recyclable. There's no compostability, so I'll put it in the recycling. And you're not supposed to do that. So can you talk to us more about if there's no way to compost it, is it still better to be serving and for someone to use a compostable package?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's a few factors to consider. One is in making the product, and not just how it's going to be disposed of, but what it's made from and how it's made. Is it a more sustainable product? Does it require less CO2 to produce? Does it emit less CO2 in the production and distribution of the product? How much water is being used to make the product? And across all of these points, the compostable products are much more sustainable. They use 70% less water to produce, 65% less CO2. So the quote unquote carbon footprint of a compostable product versus a conventional plastic is much smaller, even if it's going to a landfill. I think the other piece to consider is recycling is this big myth in the United States, and less than 9% of all plastics are even recycled. So most of the plastics that are actually put into a recycling bin do not get recycled. The large majority, over 90%. And so I think we've grown up with recycling as the answer, and recycling is, the reason why it's okay to use plastic, but it actually is not. And so this is why, from our point of view, composting is so important, and more composting infrastructure, because it gives you that, that zero waste opportunity that you just can't get with conventional plastic and doesn't happen with recycling.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point about the footprint on the front end.
Yep.
And so those stats that you cited, are those Repurpose's comparative LCA life cycle assessments, or where are those numbers coming from?
Those are actually coming from using the resins that we use. So through NatureWorks, which is the resin that we use, and using those resins versus a PET or any kind of other plastic resin is what it's compared to.
Okay, cool. And then just to clarify on that one stat, so I think it's 9% of all plastics, I think globally, are recycled. So I don't think it's that more than 90% of the plastics that get into a recycling bin are then recycled. But just in general, of all the plastics put into the marketplace, only 9% are recycled, which is still very low. And still to your point that sometimes there's no recycling access, or certain kinds of plastic, there's no market for them, so they don't get recycled. So the point still remains.
Yes.
And so, guys, I want to move us now into some PFAS specific questions and really build off the intro that brought us here to this conversation. So, Lauren, our first question to you is, was delivering products without PFAS always a focus of Repurpose, or did that perhaps come up over time?
That actually came up over time. So honestly, I wasn't even aware of the PFAS issue until probably 4 years ago. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know that it was in some of our products. And we had been in the market for several years, not realizing that we had, trace amounts of PFAS. So the minute that we did find out, this was just an immediate, okay, well, remove it right away. Just take it out. Before we even had a replacement, It was, okay, we can't be calling ourselves a sustainable company and have this in our product. This is awful.
Because do you make your own stuff? Like, did you just tell your scientists or something, or is there some third party that you had to talk to? Like, is it more an internal direction?
It's part of it's a joint venture part of our company. So we have a manufacturing arm.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, they control we work with them, but they are much more involved in the specific R&D of the mixture, for example, of the molded fiber. Whereas we know all the base ingredients and all the feedstocks, but I'm not going over a chemical data sheet to understand what's in what. We basically, when we started, we're okay, this is a paper mache mixture of eucalyptus and recycled wood chips and upcycled sugarcane. And we didn't think we just thought there was a water barrier in it. We didn't realize that there was any requirement for these chemicals. We didn't even think to ask the question.
Well, I think, Lauren, so much of that is what makes Repurpose's story that invigorating. So, we do want to be sure we say congrats on being the first tableware brand to address, eliminate, and replace PFAS in all of your products, which, again, for only having come into the realization of what PFAS is, as you're saying, 4 years ago, to phase that out, I'm sure was no small feat. So can you walk us through that transitional process of becoming a PFAS-free company and what costs and steps were associated with that process?
Yeah, I mean, it was super difficult. Number one, as soon as we found out that this was actually in the product, it was like, okay, halt, stop. This has to go right now. But when you remove it, you're also removing some of the performance attributes of the product. Like it actually is used to repel, if you have a greasy lasagna or some spaghetti, on the plate, it will repel any of the grease, or a salad with salad dressing. It's what stops the oil from penetrating through. And so we took it out saying we'd rather just take it out and have, performance issues than have it in there. So there was a short time where we actually, we just sort of basically increased the water barrier so that it would be a little better against, salad dressing and whatnot, but it still would over time, like, if you were sitting there for 30 or 40 minutes, it would seep through.
So did you tell consumers like, hey, we took out this PFAS, and there's definitely been a lot more recognition now than maybe when you were removing it about it. And so there might be some performance issues, but, be patient with us. Or did you just kind of remove it, not tell anyone? And if so, did consumers reach out to you and say, your plate didn't work as well? What's going on?
Yeah, so we did talk about it on social, and we then did receive also complaints about, yes, your product is not performing as well. But we knew, all the while we were working on a replacement, on a solution that was not toxic. And this was the difficult part. There's sort of two ways of figuring out how to do this. You could put some kind of coating on the product after it's made, which is much more expensive and time consuming. Or you can mix something into the mixture before it's actually molded, which is what you want to do, which creates a better product. It's less expensive. And it's just a much better way to do it. But the easier, quicker way in the beginning would have been just put a coating on after the fact. But we knew that it was just too time consuming in the manufacturing process. We couldn't do it right. But like that back and forth and figuring out how to do it and where it's going to go was definitely a very difficult process and took a long time to get right. And we did finally get it right where we could include something in our mixture so that it was completely non-toxic, but have the same attributes where it would repel the grease and the water. And it's interesting, we've done a lot of testing against competitors' products, many of whom have just removed it and not, replaced it. So they do have the issue of the grease seeping through, and we don't. And there are many that claim they've taken it out, but they haven't. And there's some that don't claim anything and they've left it in there and they still call their product eco-friendly. So the big piece of awareness and education here is that if there is a product that doesn't have a third-party certification that says this is certified compostable, then it has PFAS.
And Lauren, I'm curious, what was that time frame? So let's say you notice or you become aware of the PFAS issue. How long would you say it took you to figure out the solution and then turn around with a product line that had completely eliminated it?
All in, it was probably about a year.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
That sounds, incredibly quick.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a little longer, maybe 14 months, but
still.
Yeah.
Still.
Well, we knew we needed something. We had to get something. We knew we couldn't live with just removal and no replacement for just an undefined amount of time. We had to replace it. And also we wanted to get the certifications done. If you didn't have a replace, like we felt like, what's the point of certifying a product that doesn't, have anything in there that we will put in there? We don't want to have to certify twice and go through this whole process of certification twice. So let's get it right. Let's get this thing certified and move on and be able to claim kind of we're the first and we've done this and we've done it right. It was a huge project. Huge.
And this alternative, we talked in the intro about companies saying, we're going to get out of PFAS now or by this year. Is your alternative proprietary, or is it something you're selling to others, or how's that working?
No, we've actually partnered with another group that creates the PFAS-free alternative. I mean, it's in high demand, so short supply, but other companies making similar products can also work with this company, that we're not, exclusive. So I think today, especially in the early days, it was much harder to find. Today, they're also not the only company making alternatives. And so there really is no excuse to move away from PFAS at this point, because there are several alternatives out there available and ready to use.
And Lauren, I mean, I hear you say that and I love it, but then I also have to ask why you think other companies perhaps haven't made that pivot already. I mean, my first thought was like, oh, maybe this was so difficult and so treacherous and perhaps this is something proprietary that would then cause all these other companies to go through their own arduous journeys. Doesn't sound like that's the case. So, I mean, what is the excuse for other folks not following suit?
It's not regulated yet. So they just figure they can get away with it. And the consumers don't really know. And it's pretty sad. But I mean, I think not only in the case of PFAS, but in other industries and beauty and food and, apparel, what have you, I'm sure there are also, outside of PFAS, many, many chemicals that have not been regulated yet that are harmful, but that are in all of these products because they're not regulated. It's awful, but it's true.
Yeah. And in terms of people being able to buy something and have confidence that it doesn't have PFAS in it, you mentioned that one way to go about that is if it's certified compostable. So are you saying that all the compostable certifications, they all say you can't have PFAS in here? Like, does having PFAS in there literally make it so you can't compost it? Or it's just that the compostable certifications have decided that as part of safety of the product that they ultimately make, they got to make sure there's no PFAS in it so it doesn't then end up in the soil and whatnot?
Yes. So technically you could compost a product that has PFAS in it, but no third-party certification will certify it because the composters don't want contaminated soils, and they can't achieve organic certification on the compost with anything PFAS related. So today, the way to ensure that your product does not have PFAS, at least in our specific industry, is through the composting certifications.
Okay, and so Lauren, I want to now angle us a little bit towards the future. So your team and Repurpose, you guys were clearly out in front of just plant-based serviceware and PFAS generally. So I think you're the right group to ask, where do you see the plant-based serviceware market going over the next 10 years?
I really believe that in the next 10 years, number one, you won't see disposable products made from plastic anymore. It will all be plant-based, and not only plant-based, but using more sort of more sustainable feedstocks, like maybe seaweed and algae. I think there's some really interesting developments there. So we'll definitely go in that direction.
Do you think, Lauren, that's because consumers are just going to demand it and buy it, or because there's going to be policy that are going to say that those sort of plastic products can't be sold?
I think it'll be a combination of both.
Okay.
And I think that will also bleed into, we just actually launched bamboo toilet paper and paper towel. And I think for that sector, you'll see that there won't be toilet paper made from virgin trees. It will all be a much more sustainable. It's just to see how far the industry's come in 10 years. I'm actually super excited for what the next 10 years will be, because it's moving so quickly and it's super exciting. And I think it's just, there's no reason that we shouldn't be using more sustainable options. There's just no reason at this point.
And Lauren, that's great context. What else can consumers expect to see from a trailblazing Repurpose in the future in terms of sustainability initiatives generally, or addressing PFAS even further?
I think, well, number one, there is no PFAS anywhere in any of our products now and future. I think we're looking at, like I said, some of these really cool innovations on the material side. So how can we use even more sustainable materials to make the products so that they are even more degradable, so that, for example, You could put them in your green bin where it goes to a municipal composter, or you could put it in your backyard where it's just so sustainable that you really have no concern of using a single-use product because of, what it's made from and how it's made. And then going into new areas, like we've been working on, as I just mentioned, the bamboo paper towel and the bamboo toilet paper, which is really exciting for us. There's some other items kind of in the household space, like Ziploc baggies that are very exciting, that, fully compostable. And actually we're looking at some seaweed for those. So
Ziploc bags would be great, right? Because oftentimes you've got food residue in there, and that's why you don't want to keep using it.
Exactly.
And then if you just put it in your compost. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And we're partnered with a group called Lomi. I don't know if you've heard of the Lomi, but very excited about that. It's like a desktop composter that basically is kind of an appliance that whatever you put in there will actually be composted right away. And it just essentially turns to dirt, which you can then put in your compost, or you can, if you have to landfill it. But all of our products are Lomi approved. So you could put everything in there. So if you don't have a home composter, or if you don't have, access to a green bin pickup, this is an awesome way to actually ensure that everything that you're using gets composted.
Wow, Lomi owes you for that one.
Wow, there you go, Lomi. I know. There's a nice plug. Big time. But we love them because it just gives everybody that access,
Sure. Maybe, Jay, we keep that in mind for the holiday hodgepodge.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
So, Lauren, before we get into our final question, is there anything else you want to share with the listeners about Repurpose or PFAS?
Just that I think it's important to really trust the brands that have taken the steps to do it right. And you'll know that through the certifications, obviously, but that, be wary of the ones that are making claims that don't have anything to back them up. I think that's important, especially around PFAS.
Okay, so Lauren, we are now moving to our traditional last question we ask all of our guests. Let's say we are at a party that is, of course, using all kinds of repurpose goods, right? From our plates to our cups. As you guys can make wine glasses.
And we have a compost bin at this party.
We've got bamboo toilet paper and paper towels everywhere you need them. And here we are, we're talking about PFAS because obviously, we're surrounded by all these products that don't have it. We're talking about how important it is to keep that momentum going. If there is someone who wants to learn something about PFAS and we want to convey a fact to them that will stick with them forever and perhaps shock them so much they'll drop their PFAS-free compostable drink on the floor, which we clean up with these bamboo paper towels, what would that PFAS fact be?
It makes your penis smaller?
Whoa.
Is that like a verified fact?
I'm out of there.
No, there's something. I have to Google that, but there's something. Okay, sorry, it's not smaller. It's like erectile dysfunction.
Oh, a little different, but
yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Okay.
I love it.
Something related to your penis will not work as well.
Wow. I think that could cause some people to drop their drink.
That might. I actually have a more quantified stat here that up to 110 million Americans could have PFAS in their water.
Yeah. It's coming at us from so many places. It's kind of overwhelming.
It is everywhere, which is scary.
Very.
Yeah.
Well, Lauren, as we wrap up here, we want to thank you so much for joining the show, for supporting us and helping to get rid of PFAS faster than many other companies might have been able to. That 1-year pivot is very impressive. But truly, thanks so much for your time, for your insights. And I know I've learned a lot, not only about your products, about PFAS, but what to do maybe to protect, my sexual performance in the future.
Yeah. And kudos to you for making that, once you found out about it, you were like, this has to come out, and making it happen.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you guys for having me on. It's been super fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, guys.
All right, Scott, we've talked quite a bit about how PFAS can literally last almost forever in these products, right? But our episodes are not the same. Our episodes cannot last forever, and we are drawing this one to a close.
I think that's for the best, Jay.
I think so. And not to say that listening to our show will give you the same kind of side effects that you get, with PFAS, but alas, folks, we would like to thank Potions and Square Peg Round Hole for the music we use in this episode. We'd also like to thank Keaton Butler for making this audio file sound as crisp as it does. Thanks also to Amelia Kovac for helping us with all the heavy lifting for this intro research.
Yes, and I want to thank my colleague and friend, Derek Swick, very smart man, who read through the intro notes and helped us make sure that we were on point and gave some helpful edits. With that, we want to remind you to please rate, review, and subscribe the podcast on iTunes. Jay, we've been on this break. We always read a review, and we went and looked for a new review, Jay, and since March, there's been no new reviews. So sad. If anyone in the past 5 months had reviewed, we would have read it.
Scott, it turns out we were not the only ones taking a break from the show, perhaps.
Okay, that's fair. So we did go back, though. We found an oldie but a goodie. So we've got a review here from Got, all GOT, maybe Game of Thrones here. Oh, yeah, definitely. Got Fan, 9459 from January 8th, 2019. It's titled Informative and Funny. As an environmental law attorney, I often find, quote, environmental, quote, topic podcasts a bore and a chore to listen to. Not this one. Thanks for making daunting topics a bit lighter through your use of humor. Godfan Nor 59. Aw.
Scott, I gotta say, this review came in on January 8th, 2019 from Game of Thrones fan. I just went and checked. The final episode of Game of Thrones, which was highly contentious, aired on May 19th, 2019. So I don't know if, having watched Thrones myself, I cannot say I loved the ending. So I wonder how this fan reckoned with that ending after naming his username.
Well, he or she should let us know. We can be reached at hosts, HOSTS, at sustainabilitydefined.com. And we're open to any and all feedback. Maybe you thought this episode was too detailed, too long. Maybe we missed things. Maybe there's things you really liked. We want to hear it all. So please email us. And with that, Jay, I think that about does it. You all stay sustainable out there. I'm Scott Breen.
And I'm Jay Siegel. We will see you next time.